There's this really cool video that I want to react to on stream. It's super cool. It's the story about... Wait, let me do this. Aspect SMP reveal. Oh, I've already played on the SMP on stream before. We could probably do that too. But I want to react to this. The search for DB Cooper. This is an awesome video. It's like 30 minutes long. And oh my god. This story is like so freaking cool. It's a story about a dude who basically hijacked a plane. Stole like 200 grand, I think. And then just vanished. And they never found him. It's so cool.
Just let me know.
I want to watch this. It's like one of my favorite LEMMiNO videos out there.
A daring parachute escape from a flying 727 somewhere between Reno.
A search was made of the plane immediately.
We don't know who he was, where he came from, or where he went. I expect that we'll keep looking until we find him or find out what happened.
Bam. Falls to his death. Video over. Fake story. The search for DB Cooper.
In the afternoon of November the 24th, 1971, a middle-aged man carrying a briefcase walked into Portland International Airport and purchased a one-way ticket to Seattle, Washington. The man identified himself as Dan Cooper, and along with 36 other passengers and a crew of 6, he soon boarded Northwest Airlines Flight 305. Once aboard, Cooper made himself
I should be able to do that, Rainy. Why is it not
the
working?
last row of seats on the right side of the cabin. He ordered a drink and had a smoke, because this was the 70s.
And then TWA 800 happened.
Was cleared for departure, Cooper turned around and handed an envelope to flight attendant Florence Schaffner. Inside the envelope was a note featuring a handwritten message stating he had a bomb. Schaffner reluctantly sat down beside him and glimpsed what appeared to be 8 sticks of dynamite
isn't it? It should be.
Briefcase. Cooper's demands were quite simple. He wanted $200,000 in cash and 4 parachutes. He also demanded a fuel truck to stand ready to refuel the aircraft once they landed in Seattle, should they fail to comply with...
Oh, actually, I think Nightbot isn't here because I changed my name on Twitch. And I have to re-add Nightbot. I think that's what happened. Because I had Nightbot before. Pretty sure that's what happened.
He threatened to, quote, do the job.
Do the job.
Once the flight was airborne, Schaffner went to inform the cockpit crew, while another flight attendant by the name of Tina Mucklow remained by Cooper's side. By using a telephone in the rear of the cabin, Mucklow acted as an intermediary between Cooper and the rest of the flight crew for the remainder of the hijacking. For the next hour and a half, Flight 305 maintained a holding pattern near Seattle, while local and federal authorities scrambled to procure the ransom as well as the 4 parachutes. 10,000 $20 bills were collected from a local bank, while the owner of a nearby skydiving school supplied the chutes. At 5:45 p.m., more than 2 hours past its scheduled arrival, Flight 305 finally touched down in Seattle. By this point, it was well after sunset, and the aircraft was brought to a remote section of the tarmac. Once the flight came to a stop, both the ransom and the parachutes were handed over to Mucklow, who then brought them back aboard. In exchange, Cooper permitted 2 of the flight attendants as well as all the passengers to disembark, many of whom had not yet realized the flight had been hijacked. With the ransom paid and only 4 crew members remaining on board, Cooper told Mucklow to inform the captain that he wanted to fly to Mexico City. They were to fly with the landing gear down, the flaps at 15 degrees and below 10,000 feet. The lights in the cabin were to be switched off, and the aft stairway, which opens from the underbelly of the fuselage, was to remain extended.
It's logging me in as JustAspect live for some reason. Raphael, thank you for the follow. Welcome to the Black
configuration he'd requested would not allow for a non-stop flight to Mexico City.
Here we go.
As such, Cooper proposed a refueling stop in Phoenix, Yuma, or Sacramento,
now
before they all agreed on Reno, Nevada. Second of all, it was not possible to depart with the ventral staircase extended. Cooper agreed to retract the stairs on the condition that Mucklow remained by his side and taught him how to extend them once the plane was airborne.
I think I need to restart the stream.
2 hours due to complications with refueling, Flight 305 was back in the air by 7:36 p.m. Less than 5 minutes after takeoff, Cooper told Mucklow to head for the cockpit and that from this point onwards, he was not to be disturbed. The last time she saw Cooper, he was standing in the middle of the aisle as if though he was preparing to jump.
Imagine
Mucklow
actually
joined the rest
jumping
of the
from like a
crew,
flying
locked the
plane though. I'm pretty sure
cockpit
that's
door
just
behind her,
suicide anyway.
and some 3 hours later, Flight 305 safely landed in Reno. Once the flight came to a stop, the crew carefully ventured into the rear of the cabin, but there was no sign of Cooper nor the bomb. The aft stairway had been extended mid-flight and was slightly damaged upon landing. It seemed there was only one explanation for the hijacker's absence. At some point between Seattle and Reno, Cooper had strapped on a parachute, walked down the stairs, and leaped into the dark of night.
Let me try something. Okay, never mind.
As soon as it
Whatever, I'll do it
became
after
clear
stream,
that
dude. I don't
Cooper
feel
was
like
no longer on
doing that
board,
right now.
dozens of FBI agents converged upon the aircraft only to discover a disappointing amount of physical evidence. A black clip-on tie,
The little amount of evidence that this dude left behind is honestly
and 2 of
astounding.
the 4 parachutes were all that Cooper left behind.
This dude knew what he was
Evidently, brought
doing.
the ransom and briefcase along with him. In interviews conducted on the night of the hijacking, Cooper was described by the crew and passengers as a white male with brown eyes and dark hair.
Yeah, that
He
doesn't...
appeared to be in his mid-40s and wore a dark trench coat, a dark suit, a white shirt, a black tie, and dark shoes.
I mean, that literally does not say anything, considering, number one, this is the 70s, so people who are like 20 look like they're in their... Well, actually, no, the other way around. People who are in their 40s look like they're 20. He has sex with male. No, but like... like... This is like the most generic male that you could have possibly had. So the fact that they had no photo evidence of him already, like, pushes back the investigation by a long shot.
Soon after boarding, he'd also donned a pair of sunglasses. Based on this description, the FBI produced the first of several composite sketches. Before they could mount a search, however, the FBI had to figure out when Cooper abandoned ship. But that was easier said than done. None of the 4 crew members witnessed Cooper jumping from the plane, nor did the pilots of 2 fighter jets which escorted the flight between Seattle and Reno, which is not all too surprising given it was the middle of the night.
But don't they have, like,
Although
lights?
The flight crew did report something odd. The last communication with the hijacker occurred at approximately 8:05 p.m. when the crew used the intercom to offer assistance, which Cooper declined.
Okay.
Within the next 10 minutes, the crew experienced what they described as an oscillation or vibration of the aircraft. At the time, the crew suspected it might have been produced by Cooper's jump, and a subsequent recreation of the hijacking supported that conclusion.
I mean, yeah,
Okay,
you
so
would have
that's
felt
the
that,
when.
like...
But what about the where? While Cooper was very explicit about the flight's configuration and destination, he never specified any kind of route. In fact, Cooper grew so impatient with the slow refueling in Seattle that he dismissed the captain's request to file a flight plan and simply told him to, quote, get the show on the road. As such, the captain chose to fly along an airway known as Victor 23 without any input from Cooper. By using Victor 23 as a guide, authorities estimated the most probable location of the flight at the approximated time of the jump was
Yeah, but wouldn't there be, like... I might not be correct about this, but wouldn't there be, like, a radar that they tracked them on? Especially after, like, people found out the flight got hijacked. Like, after the people got off, surely they would, like, realize that, oh, that's a special flight, you know? So...
about 40 kilometers north
wouldn't
of
the...
Portland.
whatever, dude.
And so, at the break of dawn, the FBI mounted an impressive search operation using helicopters,
What I also don't understand is, wouldn't they just be able to check the flight data recorders? Or actually, no, never mind. This was the 70s. I don't think there were flight data recorders back then. When was the FDR introduced? Oh, this is something else. When... Let me just try black boxes. When were the black boxes introduced? In 1954, came up with the idea of a device that would record not only flight data, but also voices and other sounds in aircraft cockpits immediately prior to a crash. Okay. The practice started in 1994. Yeah, that was way later. Logging was not as... Yeah, I know. They were only practicing in 1994. That's almost 20... Well, that's over 20 years after this happened. But this is like a situation where you need FDR. Like, you need black boxes for this kind of shit. Because now they have literally nothing. If they had... Like, hear me out, chat. If they had the black boxes, they would have had Cooper's voice. They would have had a path, I think. I think that's how they work. Of, like, the route that the plane took. Now they have nothing.
Airplanes and ground troops. The problem was, even if the estimated bailout point was accurate, Cooper's eventual landing or drop zone was far more difficult to pinpoint. The loosely defined search area covered a vast stretch of mountainous wilderness occluded by a dense forest, so it was truly like finding a needle in a haystack.
We'll just burn down the forest
Apart from
then.
the difficult terrain, the search was further complicated by low temperatures and inclement weather, which persisted for days. Despite their best efforts, authorities never managed to find a single trace of Cooper, nor the items he'd brought along with him.
Jesus. Literally just vanished like that. Was just gone. There have been mandatory requirements in commercial aircraft in the United States since 1967? Huh? But then why didn't they use them? What? Okay. I mean, like... What? But if that's the case, they would have... Maybe it was right before it. Maybe this happened right before the black boxes were introduced. Otherwise, I really don't understand.
Having made little to no progress by early December, the FBI turned their attention to the $200,000 ransom. The money had been collected from the Seattle First National Bank, which maintained a ransom package of $250,000 just for such an occasion. Because of this, the serial numbers of the $10,020 banknotes given to Cooper had been documented in advance, a complete list of which were quickly made available to financial institutions, government agencies, and the general public. The intention was to make it as difficult as possible for Cooper to spend his money. Northwest Airlines and several newspapers even began to offer rewards to anyone who could find a note with a matching serial number.
Damn.
In spite of these efforts, no one ever did.
So at that point, they were like... At that point, they like did not even like give a shit about losing the money because they were wasting more money trying to find the dude than they would have like had if they just got the money back. But at that point, they just wanted to find the dude, which is understandable.
A decade later, in early 19...
Wait a minute.
That is until nearly... In spite of these efforts, no one ever did.
1972.
That is until nearly a decade
If this was in 1972, then why didn't they use the goddamn black boxes?
later. In early 1980, a young boy named Brian Ingram was building a campfire on a small beach in southern Washington.
Now I'm curious, what if I look at Brian Ingram? What the fuck? It's a photographer. Football linebacker. Huh. Interesting. Bunch of bullshit.
As he was digging into the sand, Ingram discovered 3 bundles of cash totaling $5,880. Having heard about the infamous skyjacking, Ingram's parents brought the severely degraded bundles to the FBI. The notes were promptly inspected, and sure enough, the serial numbers matched those of the ransom.
But then the question is, how did they get there?
Once the excitement subsided, however, the money managed to raise far more questions than it answered.
Yeah.
The most significant of which was how? How did the money end up so far away from the drop zone? Looking
wildlife.
at this map, it might be tempting to think that Cooper simply dropped some of the money, which then fell into the Lewis River. The bundles could then have been carried further downstream by the Columbia River before finally being washed ashore at Tina Bar, which is the name of the beach. Tina Mucklow, Tina Bar. Coincidence?
Yes.
Yeah, coincidence. The problem with this idea is that the Columbia River flows in the opposite direction.
I knew it.
This has led some, including members of the FBI, to re-evaluate the initial drop zone assessment. For instance, if the drop zone was much further southeast, close to a river called the Washougal River, it is conceivable, albeit improbable, that the money floated all the way down to Tina Bar. Alternatively, the bundles may have simply landed on the beach if the flight path was further to the west. Even so, natural explanations struggle to explain how 3 independent, potentially free-falling and/or free-floating bundles of cash ended up at the exact same place on the same beach.
So it has to be human
To
intervention
complicate
then.
matters, sediment from the riverbed was excavated and dumped onto Tina Bar as part of a dredging operation in 1974. And according to one analysis, the money was discovered above this layer of sediment. If true, that would mean the money came to rest at Tina Bar sometime after 1974. But a re-examination of that analysis found that what was believed to be a layer of deposited sediment might actually have been a perfectly natural layer of clay. Not only that, but the sediment was clearly dumped some distance away from where the money was discovered. Furthermore, when Ingram discovered the bundles, the rubber bands which held them together were still intact. This is significant because experiments conducted in 2009 revealed that this brand of rubber bands could not withstand exposure to open air or water for more than a year.
2009.
So, unless the bundles were somehow protected from the elements, they must have become buried at Tina Bar within a year of the hijacking. The most probable explanation, therefore, seems to be that Cooper or someone else deliberately buried the money. Did Cooper survive and bury the money himself?
Maybe.
Did someone else bury the money after stumbling upon Cooper's remains? If there is...
I mean, what if there's more than one person in this whole operation? What if Cooper was like part of a team and like he was the one doing the hijacking and then someone else, like he already had someone else on the team who was taking care of the money for him or for the team? I don't know.
An explanation which does not require human intervention, it's managed to elude investigators for decades. Suffice it to say, this is a mystery within a mystery. Since Ingram's discovery in 1980, both Tina Bar and...
Not as accurate back then, only relative location. GPS satellites were not launched until 1978. Oh,
and the
okay.
grounds around the Washougal River have been subjected to numerous searches.
That makes
But
more
to
sense.
date, there's been no sign of Cooper, nor the rest of the money.
Bruh. Yeah, that does make more sense, to be honest.
From the very beginning, it was assumed by many that Cooper did not survive his daring escape. It would not make for a very thrilling conclusion to this story, but that's the thing about stories, they're usually far more exciting than reality. While
True.
there is no hard evidence for nor against
Bam.
Cooper's survival, the assumption that he fell to his death is not without merit. When Cooper leaped into the darkness, Flight 305 was plowing through a frigid rainstorm at roughly 170 knots, 10,000 feet above southern Washington. The wind was so violent that it ripped out a placard from the aft stairway, which was later recovered in 1978 almost directly below the estimated flight path. To say that Cooper was not dressed for the occasion would be an understatement. The ground beneath him, meanwhile, was obscured by multiple layers of clouds, which likely means that Cooper jumped without knowing his precise location.
Yeah, there's
Even
no
if
way he
could
made it.
see the ground and had a specific drop zone in mind, the parachute he selected was non-steerable, meaning he would not have been able to steer his descent towards his...
Can you imagine he's like floating down on the fucking parachute like, oh, I can't see where I'm going. Oh, mate, I don't know where this is gonna end. And then he just like plows into a mountain or something.
Specific landing spot, thus precluding any potential coordination with an accomplice stationed on the ground. While Cooper expressed some familiarity with parachutes, his actual competence level is up for debate. It's widely believed that Cooper demanded 2 pairs of parachutes, 2 primary and 2 reserve, to make the authorities believe that he intended to take a hostage. That is precisely what happened, as the FBI contemplated but eventually decided against sabotaging the shoots as they did not want to risk the life of an innocent civilian.
Wow.
But in their haste to obtain them, they unintentionally provided Cooper with a non-functional dummy chute intended for training purposes.
Oh my god.
This mishap seems to have gone unnoticed by Cooper because that dummy chute was one of the 2 missing from the plane.
Oh, of course.
Not only that, but Cooper chose the older
How you doing,
and
Twitch, Aluga?
technically inferior
Welcome to the stream.
parachute out of the 2 primary.
So you only know you were traveling around X minutes in Y direction, and if those are not 100% accurate, the mistakes add up. Oh, wow. Man, it really was easy to hijack a plane back then, huh? I mean, now that you mention it, most of the, like, aviation safety rules we have now, a lot of them came after 9/11, and that was way after this. So before that, it was much easier to do shit like this. Because they didn't really know what they were doing. Well, they knew what they were doing, but it wasn't as safe as it is now. Doing fine in FNAF AR after visiting the game. What are you up to? Just watching a documentary that I wanted to show on the channel for a while. And also, we're waiting for Minecraft 1.18 to drop in 2.5 hours.
Primary chutes provided. So in both cases, it seems like Cooper made the worst possible choice. But there are other ways to interpret this information. For instance, it's possible that Cooper used the dummy chute not as a reserve, but as a means to secure the bag of money. In fact, that is precisely what Cooper tried to do with the functional reserve chute. First, he tried to place the money in the chute's canopy before removing some of the suspension lines and wrap them around the bag. Perhaps he used the dummy chute for a similar purpose. And Cooper's decision to use the older primary chute is not necessarily an indication of inexperience. It could also be a sign of familiarity because the chute he left behind was a civilian luxury chute, while the one he used was a military chute. The argument is that Cooper might have been trained as, say, a paratrooper, and chose the older military chute because that's the one with which he was most familiar.
I mean,
There is at least one.
He does need to have a motive, right? Like, there's a reason he did this. And sure, this was the 70s, so, you know, it might have just been, ooh, we found this brilliant plan to get a fuckload of money, and there's not much they can do about it, so let's just do it. But you'll see later on in the video that they also start talking about Cooper possibly having a grudge.
One other reason to suspect that Cooper had a military background.
Cliffy1, how you doing, dude? Welcome to the stream.
In Seattle, Cooper mentioned that the McCord Air Force Base was only 20 minutes away from the Seattle-Tacoma Airport. At the time, that was an accurate assessment and might suggest a military background.
See?
Apart from the potential military connections, Cooper may even have had links to the Central Intelligence Agency.
Damn.
You see, the type of aircraft which Cooper chose to hijack, a Boeing 727, was also used by the CIA to covertly drop agents.
You beat Red Rolled and then accidentally deleted the VOD, bruh. That is just what I call an F.
And supplies
Big
during
fat
the
F.
Vietnam War. A task for which the Boeing 727 was uniquely qualified due to its distinctive aft stairway.
But
so
GG's on the level,
it's
though.
fairly safe to assume that Cooper chose to hijack a Boeing 727 specifically because it provided a relatively safe means of escape. Whether he learned of this from the CIA or came to that conclusion independently is another question. However, the fact that Cooper chose to hijack a flight operated by Northwest Airlines was apparently random chance. When Tina Mucklow asked Cooper about his motives, he responded, "It's not because I have a grudge towards your airline, it's just because I have a grudge."
Mucklow asked Cooper why he picked Northwest Airlines to hijack, and he laughed and said, "It's not because I have a grudge towards your airline, it's just because I have a grudge." So there's a couple of reasons I can think of here. So one reason I can think of would be it would have something to do with, for example, him just being angry at something else and, you know, I guess, like, taking it out on other people, if you know what I mean. That could be the case. It could also be that he intended on using it for something, like, he intended on using the flight for something else. And maybe the plan just didn't work out. You know, like, we never, like, as much as, like, it's, like, a legendary story and whatnot, we never knew if this was his intended plan, right? What if his intended plan was to do something else, something went wrong, he had to improvise, and then this happened? That could also be the case, we don't know.
He further clarified that Flight 305 just happened to be in the right place at the right time. Even so, it's clear that Cooper came prepared. He seemed to know a great deal about aircraft and aviation, he appeared to be familiar with the local terrain, he maintained a low profile to avoid a panic, he covered his eyes with a pair of glasses.
Oops, sorry. Not my intention.
He failed to specify a route, but he was forced to make a last-minute destination change from Mexico City to Reno. He could have demanded more appropriate parachuting equipment like a pair of boots, a helmet, or just happened to be in the right place at the seemed to know. He maintained a low profile to avoid a panic. He covered his eyes with a pair of glasses to conceal his identity. He left very little evidence behind, and he demanded 4 parachutes to force the.
Okay, but let's look over this. That guy was behind 9/11. Honestly, he might as well be. Like, to be completely honest, I'm not saying he is, but you know. But it demonstrated extensive technical knowledge of aircraft and flying in general. So that doesn't have to mean anything, because there are some insane aviation fans out there that know a great deal about like aircraft and whatnot. And I mean, he never, like, we don't know if he actually flew an aircraft. Maybe he just knew a lot about them. Recognized the city of Tacoma from the air. Maybe that's just where he lived? Either that's where he lived or he went there a lot. But, like, he might have also just, like, studied the area to perform this heist. Like, we don't know how long he's been preparing for this. Did not want passage to be informed of the hijacking. That's completely fair, actually. At least it's not as bad as, Germanwings 9525, which was a German flight, which, basically what happened is it was flying over the Alps, I believe, if I recall. And, basically what happened was the first officer of the flight, how do I say this? What happened was the captain left the cockpit to like go get something, and as soon as he left, the first officer locked the cabin door so that he was alone in the cockpit, and then sent the plane into a descent towards the mountains on a suicide mission, and everyone died on that flight. So, you know, at least this guy like did not want to take other people with him. It was just like, yeah, this is something that I'm doing. You know what I mean?
Assumption that he was taking a hostage.
But also, covered his eyes with a pair of glasses. Isn't that just like standard? Like, you don't want to, you know, be recognized. Doesn't take a genius to do that. Was mindful of his belongings. Again, that's just paying attention.
He was even cunning enough to reclaim the note which he'd initially given to Florence Schaffner. Apart from the name he wrote on his plane ticket, there are no other samples of Cooper's handwriting.
I mean, he wouldn't have used his real name, surely.
But for all his planning and cunning, it seems Cooper did not give enough thought to his eventual escape. Not only did
I would think if it was not the plane, he might have been like, ooh, city. Yeah, true.
he failed to specify a route, but he was forced to make a last-minute destination change from Mexico City to Reno. He could have demanded more appropriate parachuting equipment like a pair of boots, a helmet, or jumpsuit. He could even have specified the ransom to be delivered in larger denominations to make it lighter and less cumbersome to carry. Presuming he did survive the fall and made it safely to the ground, he may then have had to make his way through a dense, partially snow-covered forest in nothing but loafers and a trench coat in late November. I get the distinct impression that Cooper's escape was much more of a leap of faith than a carefully executed jump.
I'm gonna... sorry. In this part, you know, I'm just gonna fucking quote Moist Critical on this and just say that, like, at first I was convinced this guy was a genius. Now I'm convinced he's just a fucking idiot.
And authorities never received a missing persons report matching the description of Cooper in the wake of the hijacking. This might suggest that Cooper did survive and that he swiftly and quietly resumed his normal routine.
I mean, here's the thing. To receive a missing person report, he would need to have people around him, which we don't know if that was the case. Maybe my theory about him having a team was wrong. He did this all alone, and he did it because, you know, he was kind of living a lonely life. You know, like, frickin', like, kind of closed himself off of everyone else. So no one really missed him. No one even knew he existed in the first place anymore. Maybe that's why.
Furthermore, other hijackers have performed similar stunts, and many of them did survive, even if they were quickly apprehended. Finally, the simplest explanation for how 3 bundles of cash ended up at Tina Bar is human intervention.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, most of this is based on nothing but supposition.
But they would also be able to check for fingerprints, right? Actually, to be fair, the bundles of cash were like buried in the ground or whatever. So if there were fingerprints, they would have probably been gone by then.
Without any concrete evidence of Cooper's demise, it leaves the door wide open to the far more exciting proposition that he did, in fact, survive.
Chapter 5. The Suspects.
By the time the press got wind of the hijacking,
Yeah, I know,
the
it's
FBI had already
1978.
begun to investigate a few potential suspects. Among them was a man in Portland with initials DB and surname Cooper. This Cooper was quickly eliminated as a suspect, but due to a mix-up by the press, the name Dan Cooper was confused for DB Cooper, and the rest is history.
Fucking
While
dumbasses.
Dan Cooper is most likely a pseudonym, there is a comic book series of the same name. The comic is written in French and centers around a Canadian pilot named Dan Cooper. While the comic was not translated into English nor sold in the United States before 1971, it was available in Canada, which has a large French-speaking population. Given that American and Canadian accents can be difficult to distinguish, it's possible that Cooper, who was described as having no discernible accent, was a bilingual Canadian. This might even be supported by something that Cooper might have said. You see, when the captain relayed Cooper's demands to air traffic control, he used the phrase negotiable American currency. It seems doubtful that an American citizen would specify American currency,
That's all
so perhaps Cooper was not American. The problem is, we don't know if this is a direct quote from Cooper or paraphrasing by the captain. For instance, notes taken by the crew during the hijacking merely contain the phrase negotiable currency, while testimonies provided by the crew after the hijacking include phrases like $200,000 in cash and circulated US currency. So Cooper might have been Canadian, and he might have taken his name from the Dan Cooper comics, just as he might have been American and might have taken his name from something or someone else. Nearly half a century has gone by since the hijacking took place,
Jesus.
and in that time thousands of suspects have been questioned and investigated. It would obviously be impossible to cover all of them here, but let's take a look at some of the people that at some point or another have been suspected of being DB Cooper.
What I don't
Robert
understand is... Okay, well, to be fair, it was like 1978. But only... why would you ask for only $200? Was it really worth that much back then? Just ask for more, like you have the chance. Because I completely understand why he vanished after this, is because the more heists like this you do, the more famous you become as a criminal. So it's easier to trace because you leave more evidence behind. So he did one heist, he got what he wanted, and then vanished. Which is the smart thing to do. If you keep pushing and do more and more, well, heists for example, then eventually, like, with each heist, it's just another chance to slip up. And then it might come bite you in the back. So...
Rackstraw first became a suspect in 1978, and on the surface, he seems like a solid candidate. He was a decorated army paratrooper and helicopter pilot. He had experience with explosives. He had an extensive criminal record. He had an uncle named John Cooper who was an avid skydiver. He was expelled from the army only months before the hijacking, which might suggest a motive.
So it's him then.
After all, the hijacker did say he had a grudge. When confronted by journalists and private investigators, Rackstraw would neither confirm nor outright deny that he was DB Cooper.
So it is
Instead,
him.
he'd say things like, "I could have been," or "I would not discount myself." On the other hand, Rackstraw had light-colored eyes, which Cooper did not.
I mean, didn't
More
you wear
significantly,
sunglasses?
Rackstraw was only 28 years of age at the time of the hijacking.
Okay, this doesn't mean anything because it's the 70s. So the equivalent should be 1,323,000 $392? Okay, I did not say a thing. Never fucking mind.
This is well outside the range of ages reported by the crew and passengers, most of whom believed Cooper was in his mid-40s.
That's actually a lot of inflation then. Like, that's way more inflation than I thought there, like, was. If something that, like, about 50-ish years ago was $200 is over $1 million today, Jesus. I guess it was really easy to be rich back then, huh?
Kenneth Christensen first became a suspect in 2003 when his brother noticed certain parallels between him and Cooper. Christensen had briefly served as a paratrooper in World War II, and since 1953 he'd worked for Northwest Airlines as both a mechanic and a flight attendant. He was 45 years old at the time of the hijacking. He was left-handed, which Cooper might have been. For instance, Cooper used his left hand to interact with his briefcase, and the clip-on tie he left on board was affixed with a tie clasp applied from the left.
Yeah, but keep in mind, this dude knew what he was doing. We don't know how much he planned. I'm not saying he planned this much, because if he did, that is a careful execution. But, like, still, that's... Like, we don't know. That's the thing, we don't know. Maybe he did it all on purpose. Maybe he tried faking being left-handed to, like, throw this suspicion off himself. Even though, sure, there's, like, not that many southpaw... Well... I'm just gonna shut up.
Shortly before he died in 1994, Christensen had supposedly told his brother, "There is something you should know, but I cannot tell you."
Oh, that's the
After his passing,
worst.
his family discovered over $200,000 in his bank accounts. To top it all off, Florence Schaffner stated that photographs of Christensen bore a strong resemblance to Cooper. On the other hand, Christensen did not match the physical description of Cooper. He was both shorter and lighter. While
I mean, that physical description is also like one of the most vague things I've ever heard. Like, it doesn't mean a single thing. It was like, he's the most, like, generic white male that you've ever seen with a pair of sunglasses and dark brown hair, which might have been a wig. So, you know.
Schaffner did see a strong resemblance. She remarked that Cooper had more hair, and that is supported by the composite sketches.
Had less hair than the hijacker. Could have shaved it off.
There was nothing suspicious about the large sums of money which he'd simply earned by selling land. Richard McCoy first became a suspect in 1972 when he hijacked a Boeing 727 and escaped via the aft stairway, much like D.B. Cooper. Because of the significant overlap between the two hijackings, some believe they must have been committed by the same person.
No.
McCoy used a fake name, he used a fake hand grenade to threaten the crew, he used handwritten notes to issue his demands. Both McCoy and Cooper used the phrase "no funny stuff" as a warning to the crew.
I also like the fact that he uses notes to not reveal his own voice. That guy was smart.
McCoy demanded $500,000 in cash and 4 parachutes.
$500,000.
McCoy also...
How much would $500,000 be today? That is a large amount of money. That's like more than double what Cooper asked for. If the amount of... Like, if the amount that Cooper demanded, which was more than half of this, was 1.3 million, this would be like 3 million? Something like that?
Out the back of the plane once they passed over his hometown in the state of Utah. Apart from the similar modus operandi, McCoy had also served in the Vietnam War as a demolition
$3.3 million. Jesus Christ.
expert and a helicopter pilot. McCoy did actually survive the fall and managed to evade authorities for 2 full days before he was apprehended and sentenced to 45 years in prison. Before his death in 1974, McCoy refused to confirm or deny that he was D.B. Cooper. On the other hand, McCoy was an avid recreational skydiver and even came prepared with a skydiving helmet and jumpsuit. He gave very specific instructions about the flight path. In addition to the fake hand grenade, McCoy also used an unloaded handgun to threaten the crew. He failed to retrieve one of the notes he'd given to a flight attendant. He was only 29 years of age at the time of the hijacking, and all 3 flight attendants were quite certain that McCoy was not Cooper. While there are meaningful parallels between these 2 cases, McCoy might simply have been a copycat who'd read about D.B. Cooper in the news.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Dwayne Weber first became a suspect in 1995
this guy.
when, shortly before his death, he supposedly told his wife, "I've got a secret to tell you. I am Dan Cooper." Following his deathbed confession, Weber's widow recalled a number of fascinating details. She claims to have found a bank bag resembling the one used in the hijacking. She claims Weber had sustained a knee injury after jumping out of a plane. Weber supposedly had a nightmare about leaving his fingerprints on the aft stairs. And a year before the money was discovered at Tina Bar, Weber had allegedly paid a quick visit to the same location. In addition, Weber was a World War II veteran, he had an extensive criminal record, he matched the physical description, and he was 47 years old in 1971. On the other hand, Weber's fingerprints did not match any of the prints collected from Flight 305. Although, to be fair, there's no way to know if any of those prints actually belonged to Cooper. Furthermore, Weber's DNA did not match a DNA sample collected from the tie clasp.
Oh.
But once again, there's no way to know if the DNA on the tie clasp actually came from the hijacker and not someone else.
Yeah, that's also true.
What's so frustrating is that the FBI likely had a much better source of DNA at one point. If you recall, 8 cigarette butts were collected from the scene, and there's a good chance they were all suffused with Cooper's DNA. The problem is, that evidence was lost at some point, and has not turned up since.
You guys are also just pretty fucking stupid over there in America, aren't you?
William Smith first became a suspect in 2018. Smith
Oh, no
served
way.
in the Navy during World War II and likely had some experience with parachuting.
No, it's not
He
him.
was 43 years old
Look
at the
at
time
him.
of the hijacking.
This is the most family-friendly grandpa I've ever seen in my life. Yeah, lost in quotation,
He had
yeah.
dark brown eyes. He matched the physical description. He shared a certain likeness with the composite sketches, especially this speculative sketch of an older D.B. Cooper. A student named Ira Daniel Cooper, who was killed in World War II, attended the same high school as Smith. Smith worked as a yardmaster for a railroad company for most of his life, but in 1970 the company filed for bankruptcy. As a consequence, Smith lost his pension, which might suggest a motive. He could, for instance, have developed a grudge towards the airline industry for their role in bringing about the downfall of the rail transportation industry. It's further speculated that Smith could have used his knowledge of railroad networks to hop on a train and escape undetected. On the other hand, Smith spent his entire life in the northeastern United States. Given that the hijacking occurred on the other side of the country and was committed by someone who at least appeared to be familiar with the local terrain, Smith is not the most ideal candidate. However, the fact that Smith worked as a yardmaster is interesting. You see, the tie that Cooper left behind was recently examined using an electron microscope, which uncovered various metallic particles. Some of these particles, especially pure titanium, were quite rare in 1971. This might suggest that Cooper worked as a manager at some sort of chemical or metallurgical facility, or possibly a rail yard.
But couldn't you have just bought the tie and it was already like that? Like, again, you...
If nothing else, I
whatever.
hope this limited selection of suspects illustrates just how difficult it is to be certain when you have so little evidence to work with. These 5 individuals look nothing alike, yet any one of them could be D.B. Cooper. Was Cooper really in his mid-40s, or did he simply look old for his age?
No.
Did Cooper really serve in the military?
No.
Which one of these sketches most closely resemble Cooper?
We don't know.
In 2016, the FBI had to admit defeat and officially close down the case. Unless someone stumbles upon Cooper's remains or manages to track down the rest of the money, it seems there is little hope of resolution. Did Cooper survive? I have no idea. But as long as that possibility cannot be dismissed, the legend of D.B. Cooper will no doubt persist.
Amazing. It's like... If Cooper is alive, I like to imagine him as some old nice guy that watches stuff about him and chuckles to himself. Wow. Yeah. But for real, like, it's because this happened so long ago that he still hasn't been found. Like, there's no way, like, basically, that anyone, by today's standards, or like that anyone could have done something like this today, because there's just too like there's too much security and stuff because of cases like this. It's because of stuff like this that stuff today is better secure, so this doesn't happen again. Also, cool code, and how you doing, dude? Welcome to the stream. Yeah, dude, that's probably still like one of my favorite like legends, quote unquote, because that shit's just genuinely cool.